HOA president blocked access to my lake. That's where I spread my wife's ashes, and now it's closed. The lake was always there, shimmering like a sheet of glass under the Georgia sun, its edges fringed with wildflowers that seemed to whisper secrets to the wind. For me, it wasn't just a lake height was sacred. It was where I'd scattered Sarah's ashes 3 years ago, where her laughter still echoed in the ripples, where I could sit on the weathered dock and feel her presence in the quiet. Every Sunday, I'd walk the half-mile from my house, past the neat rows of suburban homes, to sit by the water and talk to her. It was my ritual, my tether to her memory. Until the HOA president, Karen Whitaker, decided the lake was a liability and blocked access with a chain-link fence and a padlock that gleamed with petty authority. Karen was the kind of woman who wielded her title like a scepter. She'd moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago, her McMansion gleaming with fresh paint and her lawn manicured to an unnatural green. She'd taken over the homeowners association with the zeal of a dictator, issuing fines for unapproved mailboxes, outlawing garden gnomes, and sending strongly worded letters about community standards. Nobody liked her, but nobody crossed her except me, apparently, because I couldn't let the lake go. Not when it held Sarah's ashes, her essence scattered in the water she'd loved. I tried reasoning with Karen at first. I knocked on her door, hat in hand, and explained why the lake mattered. "It's where my wife's ashes are," I said, my voice cracking. "It's all I have left of her." Karen's lips pursed, her eyes narrowing behind her designer glasses. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "the lake is private property, and we can't have residents wandering around unsupervised. It's a safety issue." Safety. As if I was going to drown in the shallows or sue the HOA for a splinter from the dock. I left her porch that day with a sinking feeling, knowing this wasn't over. The next week, the fence went up. I saw it from my kitchen window, a glinting scar across the path to the lake. I marched to the HOA meeting that night, my hands shaking with a mix of grief and rage. The community center was packed, the air thick with murmurs and the scent of cheap coffee. Karen stood at the podium, her blonde bob immaculate, her smile as sharp as a blade. "The lake closure is non-negotiable," she declared. "We're protecting property values." Property values. I wanted to scream that my wife's memory was worth more than her inflated real estate ego. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly. "That lake is where I spread my wife's ashes," I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. "You're locking me out of the only place I can still feel her." The room went silent, eyes darting between me and Karen. For a moment, I thought I'd reached her, that some shred of humanity might crack her facade. But she just tilted her head, her voice syrupy with fake sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. Callahan, but rules are rules. We can't make exceptions." That was the moment I decided to fight back. I wasn't going to let Karen Whitaker erase Sarah's memory with her bureaucracy. I started small petitions, flyers, even a social media page called Save Our Lake. The neighborhood rallied, or at least most of it did. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who'd lived here longer than anyone, brought me homemade cookies and whispered, "Give her hell, Tom." Even the teenagers got involved, sneaking out at night to spray paint "Free the Lake" on the fence. It was exhilarating, this rebellion, this spark of defiance after years of numbness. But Karen was a fortress. She countered with cease and desist letters, threats of fines, and a smug assurance that she'd win. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Eddie, the HOA's treasurer and Karen's supposed lapdog. I'd always pegged him as spineless, a balding accountant type who nodded along to Karen's every whim. But one evening, as I was stapling flyers to telephone poles, Eddie pulled up in his beat-up sedan. "Tom," he said, his voice low, "I know something that could help." I froze, suspicious. "Why would you help me?" I asked. He glanced around, nervous, then leaned closer. "Because Karen's not who she says she is. And I've got proof." Eddie's revelation hit like a thunderbolt. He'd been digging into the HOA's finances, something about discrepancies in the budget, and found that Karen had been siphoning funds for personal use. Trips to the Bahamas, a new SUV, even a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly mortgage. "She's been using the lake closure as a distraction," Eddie said, handing me a USB drive. "This has everything: bank statements, emails, receipts. She's done." I stared at the drive, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was about bringing Karen down. I spent that night poring over the files, my coffee growing cold as I read. Eddie was right. Karen had been skimming thousands from the HOA's account, funneling it through a fake maintenance fund for the lake. The irony was bitter. She'd locked me out of Sarah's resting place to cover her own greed. I felt a surge of triumph, but also a pang of dread. Confronting Karen meant escalating this war, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the fallout. The next morning, I called an emergency HOA meeting. Karen tried to shut it down, citing procedure, but the board overruled her, thanks to Eddie's quiet lobbying. The community center was packed again, the air electric with anticipation. I stood at the podium, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. "This isn't just about the lake," I said, holding up the drive. "It's about trust. Karen Whitaker has been stealing from us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. I plugged the drive into the projector, displaying the damning evidence bank transfers, emails where Karen bragged about her clever accounting. The room erupted in shouts. "Resign," someone yelled. Karen stood, her voice shrill. "This is a witch hunt. Those documents are fabricated." But the evidence was ironclad, and Eddie, to everyone's shock, stood up to corroborate it. "I've seen the accounts," he said. "She's been lying to us all." For a moment, I thought we'd won. Karen's reign was crumbling, and the lake would be free. But then came the second twist, the one that turned my victory to ash. As the crowd jeered, Karen's composure cracked, and she spat out words I'll never forget. "You think this is about money?" she screamed, pointing at me. "You're all so obsessed with your precious lake, but you don't know the half of it. That lake's toxic. Your wife's ashes are sitting in a cesspool." The room fell silent. My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say. Karen's eyes gleamed with vindictive triumph. "I had the water tested last month. It's contaminated chemical runoff from the old factory upstream. I closed the lake to protect you idiots, but you're too busy playing martyr to care." She tossed a folder onto the table, papers spilling out. Lab reports, stamped and official, showing elevated levels of arsenic and lead. I grabbed the reports, my hands shaking. The words blurred together, but the truth was clear. The lake, Sarah's resting place, was poisoned. I'd been sitting there every Sunday, talking to her, breathing in the air, oblivious to the danger. The crowd's anger turned to confusion, then fear. Karen, sensing her moment, straightened. "I was going to announce it after the cleanup plan was approved," she said, her voice regaining its polish. "But you forced my hand." I stumbled out of the meeting, the world spinning. The lake wasn't just classism, it was tainted, a betrayal of everything I'd held sacred. Sarah's memory, the one thing I'd clung to, felt desecrated. I drove home, the USB drive still in my pocket, useless now. Karen might lose her position, but she'd already won. She'd turned my sanctuary into a lie. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the stars. I thought of Sarah, her smile, the way she'd dance barefoot on the dock, her laughter mingling with the water's lapping. I wanted to believe she was still there, in the lake, in the air, in me. But doubt gnawed at me. Was she trapped in poison, or was she free, carried by the wind to some cleaner, kinder place? I didn't know anymore. The fight wasn't over. I'd keep pushing to reopen the lake, to clean it, to make it safe again. But the cost was already too high. Karen's greed had been exposed, but her final blow had shattered something deeper: me certainty, my peace. The lake was still there, behind its fence, but it wasn't mine anymore. And neither, it seemed, was Sarah. The days after the HOA meeting blurred into a haze of anger and disbelief. I couldn't bring myself to walk past the lake, knowing it was poisoned, knowing Sarah's ashes were mingled with something toxic. My house, once a haven filled with her warmth, felt like a mausoleum. Her favorite scarf still hung on the coat rack. Her gardening gloves sat untouched on the kitchen counter. But they were just relics now, mocking me with their permanence. I'd lost her all over again, and Karen Whitaker was to blame not just for the fence, but for shattering the illusion that I could still hold on to her. I wasn't alone in my outrage. The neighborhood buzzed with fury. Karen's embezzlement had ignited a firestorm, and Eddie's betrayal as quiet, calculated defection had left her scrambling. The HOA board called for her resignation, and when she refused, they scheduled a vote to oust her. I should have felt triumphant, but the victory tasted like ash. The lake was still locked, still toxic, and no amount of justice against Karen could undo that. Eddie became an unlikely ally. He showed up at my doorstep a few days later, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot. "I didn't know about the contamination," he said, his voice raw. "I swear, Tom, I thought she was just covering her tracks with the money." I believed him, not because I trusted him, but because his guilt was palpable. He'd been complicit in Karen's schemes, rubber-stamping her budgets, but now he was unraveling, haunted by his own role in the mess. "I want to help," he said. "Whatever it takes to fix this." We formed a plan not just to take down Karen, but to save the lake. Eddie had connections at the county environmental office, and I had the neighborhood's support. We organized a cleanup campaign, rallying residents to pressure the HOA into funding a proper remediation. Mrs. Jenkins baked another batch of cookies, this time for the volunteers who showed up to meetings with homemade signs and fierce determination. Even the teenagers, with their spray paint bravado, pitched in, passing out flyers and collecting signatures for a petition to the county. But Karen wasn't done fighting. She hired a lawyer, a slick guy in a pinstripe suit who showed up to the next HOA meeting with a stack of legal threats. "My client acted in the best interest of the community," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The lake closure was a necessary precaution, and the financial irregularities are a misunderstanding." Karen sat behind him, her face a mask of defiance, but I saw the cracks her hands trembled slightly. Her smile was too tight. She knew she was losing ground. Then came another twist, one that turned the knife in my gut. At the meeting, a woman stood up, someone I'd never noticed before. She was small, unassuming, with graying hair pulled into a messy bun. Her name was Lila, a retiree who lived on the edge of the neighborhood. "I worked at the factory upstream," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Back in the 80s, before it closed. We knew it was leaking chemicals into the lake, but the company covered it up. I have documents memos, test results that prove it's been toxic for decades." The room went still. I felt like I'd been punched. Decades. Sarah's ashes, scattered 3 years ago, had been resting in a lake poisoned long before Karen's fence went up. Lila approached me after the meeting, her eyes full of regret. "I didn't know about your wife," she said, handing me a folder. "I should have spoken up sooner, but I was afraid. I wanted to be angry, to blame her for staying silent, but her guilt mirrored mine. We'd both failed Sarah in our own ways, him for not knowing, her for not acting." Lila's documents were a goldmine. They detailed years of negligence by the factory, corroborated by internal emails and suppressed EPA reports. The contamination wasn't just recent runoff. It was a legacy of greed, buried under corporate lies. I shared the files with Eddie, who passed them to his contact at the county. Within days, the story hit the local news. "Suburban lake toxic for decades. Residents demand action." The pressure was on, not just on Karen, but on the county to fund a cleanup. Karen, cornered, went on the offensive. She held a press conference on her pristine lawn, flanked by her lawyer and a handful of loyalists. "I've been scapegoated," she declared, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "I closed the lake to protect this community, and now I'm being vilified for it." She even had the gall to mention Sarah, claiming she was heartbroken for my loss. I watched the broadcast from my living room, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. She was rewriting the narrative, painting herself as the victim, and some people were buying it. But the tide was turning. The county launched an investigation into the lake's contamination, and the HOA board, emboldened by the public outcry, voted Karen out. She left the meeting in a huff, her lawyer trailing behind her, and for a moment, I thought we'd won. The fence came down the next day, a symbolic victory, but the lake was still off limits, cordoned off with yellow caution tape and signs warning of toxicity. I stood at the edge, staring at the water, and felt a hollow ache. This wasn't freedom. It was a reminder of how much I'd lost. The cleanup began a month later, funded by a settlement with the factory's parent company, which had been dragged into the spotlight by Lila's documents. Volunteers in hazmat suits dredged the lake, pulling up sludge that reeked of chemicals. I couldn't watch. Instead, I threw myself into the campaign, organizing fundraisers and speaking at town halls. Eddie was there too, quieter now, his guilt driving him to work harder than anyone. We became an odd pair, the widower and the turncoat, united by a shared need for redemption. One night, As we sorted through cleanup proposals, Eddie cracked a joke, something about Karen's tacky handbag collection, and I laughed for the first time in months. It felt wrong, like betraying Sarah, but it also felt human. Eddie noticed my hesitation and said, "She'd want you to laugh, Tom. You know that." He was right. Sarah had always been the one to find humor in the darkest moments, her wit a light in the storm. I clung to that thought, letting it anchor me as the cleanup dragged on. Months passed, and the lake began to heal. Test results showed declining toxin levels, and the county approved limited access. I walked to the dock for the first time in nearly a year, my heart pounding. The water looked cleaner, the wildflowers brighter, but it wasn't the same. I sat down, my fingers tracing the weathered wood where Sarah used to sit, and tried to talk to her. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I didn't know. The words felt inadequate, swallowed by the wind. Then came the final blow, the one that broke me. The county's final report, released just before the lake's official reopening, revealed that the cleanup couldn't remove all the toxins. Trace amounts of arsenic would remain, a permanent scar from decades of neglect. The lake was safe for limited use, the report said, but swimming and fishing were discouraged. Sarah's resting place, the place I'd poured my grief into, would never be whole again. I went to the reopening ceremony anyway, driven by some stubborn need to see it through. The neighborhood gathered, a mix of hope and unease in their faces. Eddie gave a speech, his voice steady now, promising ongoing monitoring and community vigilance. Lila was there too, her eyes wet as she squeezed my hand. "We did what we could," she said. I nodded, but the words felt empty. As the crowd dispersed, I stayed by the lake, alone. The sun was setting, painting the water gold, and for a moment, I could almost see Sarah, her silhouette dancing on the dock. But it was just a trick of the light. She was gone, and the lake, no matter how much we'd fought for it, couldn't bring her back. Karen was gone too, her house on the market, her name a curse in the neighborhood. But her shadow lingered, a reminder of how one person's selfishness could ripple outward, tainting everything. I thought about moving, leaving this place behind, but I couldn't. This was Sarah's home, our home, and even a poison lake was better than nothing. I'd keep coming back, keep talking to her, even if the water wasn't pure. Maybe that was the point, not purity, but persistence, the stubborn act of holding on. The fight had cost me more than I'd expected. It had exposed truths I wasn't ready for, forced me to confront my own blindness. But it had also shown me the strength of a community, the unexpected courage of people like Eddie and Lila, the way grief could forge unlikely bonds. I didn't win, not really. The lake was open, but it was tainted, and so was I. What do you think? Was I right to fight for the lake, knowing it could never be what it was? Was Karen's closure of the lake justified, or was she just hiding her own crimes? Share your thoughts. Who was right, who was wrong, and what would you have done?